if impulsiveness is a factor, to what degree can, like, because I guess impulsiveness could be considered like a personality trait.
Yeah.
Or, to what degree can one's impulsiveness be modified? Like, is that something that is dealt with, let's say, young kids that are using drugs? Is part of their therapy or rehab?
Can be.
Trying to modify their impulsiveness?
Because typically when you think of an impulsive, you think of ADHD, right? Or FAS, fetal alcohol syndrome kids, right? That which might be a little bit more difficult to deal with. But yeah, impulsiveness can be dealt with through cognitive behavioral therapy or even medications. It can be. But you'll find that at the end of this, you take care of one. It's like a hydra. You cut one head off, there's a bunch of other heads that might cause something, right? Family of origin. You know, was your family using? You're coming home and your dad's passed out on the couch, or mom had a crack pipe in her mouth. You know, abuse. So when you typically think about it, it's like, oh, they were abused. That's not necessarily the case all the time. Culture is also a potential factor. External stressors, so poverty, job stress, single parenting, unemployment, and divorce. And you'll find that single parenting takes a lot of this stuff into effect too, right? It's an amalgam. Exposure to trauma. Soldiers coming back from war, or not even having to. You know, obviously you can talk more about this, but you don't have to have experienced actual warfare in so much as just being close to it or seeing what the results are, right? You know, a lot of this research in terms of trauma and drug use stemmed from the Vietnam War. That's where we get, you know, the PTSD and the use of heroin and such. Simply because it was available, you're in the Golden Triangle, but also the age of the kids and what they were witnessing, a lot of them. Okay, and peer group is also a big one. You know, what's your peer group like? Is your peer group into drugs? Peer pressure is not like the after-school specials where, you know, some kid is doing this. Hey, you want to smoke weed? No. Oh, you're a loser. Okay, I'll smoke weed. It's a lot more insidious than that. It's like it's your friend smoking weed, having a good time. And you're like, what am I missing out? Because most people will be like, do you want it? No, good. Okay, more for me. Right? They're not going to force you into drinking it or taking it. The other issue is also availability of substances. Like, what's available? Depending where you live, you'll notice a kind of spike in certain drugs. You're not going to get a high rate of cocaine use out in the woods if you're a logger, but alcohol use, right? Vancouver, a lot more common if you want to do crystal meth or cocaine. Alberta, maybe not, because it just costs more money. It's the availability that also influences. And remember, if you need a drug, you will get a drug. Okay, tell a little anecdote. I worked in a custody center for youth for 4 years, and one of the guards came over and said, "Hey, 3 of the kids are sick." Okay, talk to the doctor. No, we want you to see something. So basically, they showed me a liter plastic bottle of Coke, right? And at the bottom was this just gross, multicolored, moldy crap that these guys had drunk. I was like, what the hell? And then I'm looking at it, it's like, you know what they did? And they're like, no, what? I go, that's homemade hooch. And they're like, how? I go, well, let's look at this. And we kind of pieced it together. And at lunch, kids would get fruit, right? You know, like the fruit in the little thing. They would save it, throw it into the bottom of the bottle. Sugar ferments. Sugar produces alcohol. Sugar also produces violent vomiting. So, like I said, where there's a will, there's a way. And if you need a drug, you will get a drug, and you will try to kind of smoke. I mean, I remember seeing kids just trying salt or whatever, just because they thought it might get them high. Oh, got this. I love this, by the way. Okay, so continue. Any questions about that? The risk factor. Like I said, there's multiple risk factors. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
I was just reading recently this thing in National Geographic about the teenage brain, and they're looking at impulsivity in youth, and that it's actually a part of our inheritance is a good thing. That this is something that teenage brains do as an evolutionary thing.
Yeah. It's a development. It's not necessarily a negative thing. It's a developmental. It's part of the development of like a teenage brain. Because when you think about teenagers, you think about one of the stereotypes. They do stupid stuff, right? But they typically are able to kind of get around it. But that's what, like, one hand giveth, the other hand taketh. So there's a thing impulsive, like I'm going to go snowboarding and I'm going to go off the beaten path. There's another thing, I'm going to try this drug. So at the end of this, you'll find that it's not just one thing. It's a convergence of factors, and impulsivity being one of them that may cause somebody to start using drugs or abuse drugs. Sorry, go on, I interrupt you.
Yeah, so my question is just wondering if in your work in youth addictions, if there's any people looking at like availability of an outlet for impulsivity, so that if I don't have an outlet for impulsivity, I'm going to find an outlet for impulsivity.
Yeah.
If drugs is available, that's what I'm going to choose.
Yeah, there are some community centers do a lot of this, like kind of the sporting, like, you know, skateboarding or basketball, or trying to get them just like physically engaged. But there's also related to sensation seeking, and I'm not sure if any of you have heard of this. Sensation seeking is also it's Zuckerman. His idea was that certain individuals are just basically genetically predisposed to need a little bit more excitement, or a lot more excitement than others. And if they don't get that certain excitement, it doesn't feel good. So if we get excited driving 90 clicks an hour on the highway, they need to go 120 to get the same kind of feeling. But no, but the thing is, specifically targeting impulsivity, it's more of a clinical thing, right? I know that they try to engage kids into groups or athletic events, and make it kind of more accommodating to them, but there's not anything specifically for that. That's where, like I said, where I come in and I would kind of say, okay, like I'm talking to somebody, maybe let's deal with this. Because, you can usually tell a kid that's impulsive when they come into the office just by talking to them. So continuing with substance use. Now, substance use, obviously, as in any kind of use of anything, falls on a continuum. It's neither, the two extremes are yes, no, but there's always in between. And think of it as the bell curve, right? Probability curve. Most of it occurs right in the middle of what the typical use is. So, non-users. So basically, non-users are people who choose to abstain. They just do not use. And the reasons they may not use are varied. Health reasons, they may not want, body's a temple and all that. Religious, cultural groups. A big one, negative experiences with an addiction. So AA members, people that have abstained. Okay, and they're following a program and they avoid all drugs. Even more common is following the use of a drug they realize, not for me, I don't like it. Okay? Alcohol. See, the funny thing is, with alcohol, typically no matter if you get a hangover or you puke your guts out, you will go back in a month, simply because that's what kids do when they party, a lot of kids, right? There's alcohol, that's part of the party. It's a social lubricant. Okay? A more extreme example is if somebody decides that they want to try heroin. And if anybody's ever been on any kind of like strong painkillers, multiply that by a bunch, you know what heroin's like. One heroin addict said to me, it's like floating on a bed of daffodils. And if it wasn't for the constipation, it'd be the best drug. Okay? So, heroin though, even when people use, a common side effect is vomiting after you use. That doesn't stop people though. Right? So, it really depends on the experiment and what's going to happen. But I find that this typically kind of falls down when it comes to alcohol and more kind of common, like even pot, right? But more so alcohol, because it is, even if you're dealing with a group of people that don't do any kind of illegal drugs, alcohol's always there. Alcohol is at your home. It's out, wherever. Experimentation. And to experiment, people ask me, how long is it experimentation? Well, it's typically, 2 or 3 times or so. Maybe even once typically it's just kind of like, no, I'm not going to use it. So 2 or 3 times. You need, first of all, there's some necessary conditions for you to want to experiment. Okay? And you more or less have to have these. First of all, the big duh, you have to be willing to try the drug. Okay? And willing to try the drug is driven by your peers, media, curiosity. So friends or acquaintances that use, and a sense of safety about the drug in a setting. That's very important. So that goes to that. If you see your friends using and they're not having any kind of ill effect and adverse effects, they're enjoying themselves, that provides a safe environment for you to try to use. If your friends are there to kind of back you up, if something happens, you're more willing to try. I know, I've heard of like 19, 20-year-old kids going to like 13-year-old kids and giving them free booze just to see how quickly they can make them puke. That's not trusting environment, okay? That's just fun for the 18 or 19-year-olds, and stupid too, by the way. But so some of the reasons for experimenting: boredom, curiosity, the big one, the peer pressure, lack of stimulating or exciting alternatives, a need to belong, and sometimes, and it's not really kind of something that comes up that you think about, is self-medication. It's almost by accident. If somebody is bored or is not very stimulated about anything, they might be suffering from depression, let's say. And all of a sudden they take a drug and it's like, I feel good about myself, I actually feel motivated to do something. It's like, okay, well, this is a good thing. I'm being reinforced. And like I said, I'm not talking too much about the brain, but the drugs hit the reinforcement center of the brain and hit it strong. And that's where everything comes around. And so we have basic drives, and one of in a nutshell, the basic drive is for pleasure. We enjoy feeling good. Occasional use. This is where you start getting more of the population involved. And this is to celebrate special occasions. The use is infrequent: weddings, Christmas, New Year's. Typically never to intoxication, maybe to tipsiness. You feel a little glow. But it's not ever really associated with any life's problems. Now, having said that, given what our drinking and driving laws are like now, it can. It doesn't make you an alcoholic, but one glass of wine can get you into trouble. Okay? Social use. And this is, I would say, probably the vast majority of people use it in this way. Okay? And it's generally done in social settings, but the important thing is that it's one factor in the event. It's not the end-all, be-all factor of the event. If you talk to any adolescent, when they're going to a party, it's A, to be with their friends, hopefully get wasted, and meet somebody. Mix and match the order. But those are the kind of order. But alcohol is always kind of like at the forefront for typical adolescence. Okay? Now, some of the key concepts of this, it's no important aspects of a person's life are affected by this. Okay? Now, you do get the office party morons, but that's usually just oops, right? If you didn't get fired or sexual harassment suit, it's typically, it's kind of a one-off deal. The use is not important compared to other activities. So you don't miss your soccer game the next day. You don't miss work. And the reasons for using is just basically socialized, because I'll tell you a little secret. Drugs work. Okay? Drugs do what they tell you they're going to do, and even better than you think they're going to do. The problem is the long-term effects. That's when you have to pay it. But just remember, people use drugs because drugs work. And we celebrate important occasions. Even people that don't drink will typically take a sip of champagne on New Year's, right? Even just a little try.